was a study we were doing here. Friends will start reflecting it now. Mr. Ihsan, let me turn to you. Of course, the statements here over this nuclear tension are high-pitched, and Trump is being Trumpy. As a matter of fact, today, Medvedev's latest statement on this issue, we do not intend to enter into a polemic with Trump on nuclear submarines, but Mr. Ahmed pointed to Yalta in 1945. Back to the conference. When Trump first took office on January 20th, I wondered whether the policy with Russia was changing and whether Russia and America would be closer in the future. I would really like to ask you whether it has returned to its traditional policy today. And let's take a look at America's submarines on one side and Russia's submarines on the other side. Submarines here, American Ohio-class submarines. We have written the details. 20 launch tubes can carry 11-20 warheads just below Los Angeles-class submarines. When we look at the details there, we see that they can attack ships and submarines from 50 kilometers with Mk-48 torpedoes. There are Seawolves that can fire Tomahawk missiles from 8 torpedo tubes and carry up to 50 weapons. It can carry Tomahawk missiles and about 25 Mk-48 torpedoes. Let's look at the Russian front. For example, 16 ballistic missiles on Kalmar-class submarines. These submarines of the Bory class with multiple nuclear warhead systems and land-based missile carrying capacity of 8,000 to 9,300 square kilometers. Antis can carry 24 Grani anti-ship missiles with a range of 600 kilometers. They can also carry torpedoes and mines. Of course, when we look at the Yasin-class submarines, it can neutralize sea and land targets from approximately 1,000 kilometers with its hypersonic cruise missile. Another Shuka and Shuka B-class submarines. RK-55 hits targets at 550 kilometers with Garnet and various cruise missiles. And finally, there are Project 945 and 945A from 300 to 600. It can neutralize ground targets with cruise missiles from kilometers. So this is the picture when we compare it. But on the other hand, is it the need to get such a public support? The effort to show that there is a need is made by leaders.
Now, when Russia was in such a miserable situation, Clinton insulted Russia very much at such an international meeting. Of course, Yeltsin said, even though he was drunk. I think Clinton said he didn't know we had nuclear warheads. That's how she reacted. At that time, Russia was at its most miserable. So it was not well represented. Now we know there will be no nuclear war. Anyway, if there is going to be nuclear war,
He's
having
Israel. A crisis, Bill Clinton. I'm so sorry. I wish when Boris Yeltsin was asked by a journalist that this meeting with Bill Clinton was a disaster, and he turns and says to the journalist, "You're the one who's a disaster." And Bill Clinton bursts out laughing for 8 minutes. So an incredible moment,
but
hug
at that
for Boris
meeting,
Yeltsin.
I think Clinton replied that he didn't know we had nuclear
Boris
warheads.
Yeltsin.
Now, there will not be such a war. If there's a nuclear war, we'll know that Israfil blew the wall. So the world has come to an end. Now we'll have to deal with the reckoning on the other side. On the other hand, one moment, there is a crowded showdown. The battle begins. Mrs. Ihsan Sureyas has a very nice anecdote about this. In Russia, this atheism is very common. Well, he was a student in France. Then there was the Algerian occupation. Does God exist or not? He says that even if he doesn't exist, he must exist. Who is going to settle your accounts for these atrocities? This account must be settled one day. Now, when the war started, Turkey actually performed a very important function. It brought the two sides together. And I think it was an unprecedented event in the history of the world. Mr. President made a speech. Parties drinking each other's blood on the field. Both of them gave a standing ovation to the president. How impartial, how fair, how just this is. So one of the two sides could have been satisfied, whereas both could have been satisfied. It actually means that on that day, Russians, Ukrainians in favor of ending the war, but they immediately released footage of a massacre by the British Secret Service and prolonged the war. The war could have ended. How could it end? When Trump took office, as soon as time came, he would first look at the field. He would strengthen his side. He would provide weapon support, ammunition support, proof support. The war would come to a balance. In other words, Russia and Ukraine would have come head to head. What are wars fought for anyway? Wars are fought to define borders, to draw lines. Russia would look at it too because it was a bit expensive, but Trump, I don't know, he did what a tribal state would do. First, he called in people who fought on their own ground, that is, who fought for their own land. Beat up his own ally. I think in the history of the world, he could win the title of the first head of state to beat up his ally and not his rival. I think Putin took advantage of Trump's naivety. Hazar in such a psychologically disturbed Ukraine, while there is a debate about whether the West will support or not, whether they will fight or not, increased its own pressure and progress. European states got into a mood. Sir, if it were America, we would continue this work. They called Zelensky, they held talks. Do you know what was the most effective thing they did? In fact, in a way, this is also a situation that shows Europe's security sainthood. It was to sit Zelensky at the table with Trump. So this was the biggest success of European diplomacy. I think Britain is playing a multifaceted game here. Historically, Britain has always been distant from Russia's growth and development. That is why it supported the Ottoman Empire, including the Crimean War, its territorial integrity. On the other hand, it separated itself from Europe. Britain had a prediction that Europe was going to go backwards. Think of it like this. The United States of America is a giant. China is developing on the other side. And I think there was a prediction that European prosperity was going to decline. Here, Britain is actually doing a very successful job. One, it is weakening continental Europe. In other words, the France-Germany equation is getting weaker. On the other hand, Russia is weakening. And in the long run, Britain's two rivals are both declining. Trump has an interesting view of Europe. In fact, Trump is not fighting China, he is not fighting Russia. Trump is in direct conflict with the states of continental Europe, and he doesn't care. So the future of Germany, he doesn't care about the future of other countries, he doesn't care about the NATO concept. This has never given us an opportunity. In other words, the United States of America with the Besiktas, Trump with continental Europe, to be so distant. They are also at war with Russia. Now think about the arrogance of Europeans 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I realized this in the Syrian war. A civil war started in Syria. The US is there, Russia is there, Iran is there, Turkey entered from one side. There is no continental Europe, there is no England, no Germany. Of course, we have a lot of Western myths like these CIA myths. Sir, even if there is no Germany, there is Isparta. No, they don't exist. At the end of the day, in the global equation, these states have no equivalent. France tried to sell us a checker on Libya. Then we saw how our president softened, how Macron gave soft messages. Now what is in our favor? Especially the Republic of Turkey, which has a strong army. In terms of equipment, it has been a pain since the beginning of the Ottoman modernization. When it started to equip its powerful army with its own equipment, a power emerged. Now, France, Germany, and dozens of small European states, they started to turn and look at Turkey. Can it be accepted into the European Union? Can we have solidarity in the defense industry? I agree with Mr. Ahmet. If Germany intends to build an army today, it can reach a fighting army in 50 years. It's a joke. Even the hangars are rented out to the private sector. You know the ammunition hangars? So it won't be empty. Now they'll sit down first. They'll send lawyers, they'll empty the hangars, then they will produce ammunition and put it there. I mean, it is very difficult to make an army capable of fighting a war in 5 to 10 years. If Ukraine had fallen, Russia, that is to say, Russia can reach the French border, could have approached. Then there is Poland, which Russia has historically been hostile to. In fact, Poland is the most afraid of this war. It wants both patriots and nuclear weapons. In other words, Poland wants everything. Let us not be surprised if one day Russia cannot overcome its anger and attacks Poland, because they have no historical enmity with Ukraine. In fact, Ukrainians and Russians alike, to some extent, saw themselves as the same nation, the same state. Most of the time, yes, that after 2014, there was a wave of nationalism against the Russians in Ukraine. He prepared an army, so he has 40 million inhabitants. It put up a significant resistance, but They are not as distant from the Russians as the Poles are. I believe that the United States can only win the war not by nuclear threat, but by stabilizing the situation on the ground. I think it will turn into peace. I don't know if Trump is ready for such a long-term challenge. I think this. Putin took advantage of Trump's naivety, and he abused it. He abused Trump's naivety and took great advantage. We don't want that either. We do not want Russia to turn the Mediterranean into a Russian lake. And let me tell you, Mr. President is on one of the best journeys between him and Putin. And in all international meetings, it has never accepted the annexation of Crimea. So think of it like this: these so-called allies, Ukraine, Germany, France, Italy, and so on, so many allies, and yet to this day, there is not a single European country that raises the issue. Turkey alone. This is what Biden did. He brought together the European states that Trump had scattered. After bringing them together, he gave them a war as a gift, the Ukraine-Russia war. I don't know when they will get out of it. Maybe this is what happened. It was useful only in terms of Syria. This war made it easier for Russia and Iran to withdraw from Syria. Maybe it was something for us in the long run. I think this is the way out.